What is going on, everybody? Welcome back. Another edition here of the Auburn Undercover podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. My name is Nathan King. To all our Facebook watchers out there, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Going to do a little bit of a preview here. Obviously, the SEC tournament starts up tomorrow. Auburn does not play in it until Friday. They get that double bye after winning the conference outright as the number one seed. Obviously, a few years ago, back in 2017-18, it was the same deal for them. They locked up the number one overall seed there because of their win over Tennessee in that head-to-head. They lost to Alabama in the first round there. Obviously, they're trying to avoid that this time around. So got Mr. Mark Murphy on here. I'll bring Mark in. Mark, we got the All-SEC awards today as well, so plenty to talk about as the college basketball season completely now pivots to the postseason. I guess looking at this Auburn team right now, we'll get into the awards here in a second, but something you were talking about today. Bruce Pearl's all about history, and this team, as you brought up, continues to have opportunities to make history because no Auburn team ever has gone down and won the SEC tournament. Obviously, they haven't won a bunch of conference championships overall in their history, but they've never been able to do both in the same season. And it seems like this year, I know it's a strong field, especially at the top, but they've probably got a pretty good chance to do so.
Yeah, that would be very impressive, Nathan, if they could win the league tournament this year and sort of pull off the big double. And I think they got as good a chance as anybody to do it, but it's not going to be easy. I mean, even though they've got the one seed, they got a pretty favorable bracket. Bruce Pearl wanted to play the early games. He's getting his way. They'll start on brunch on Friday. If they win that game, they'll play lunch on Saturday and lunch on Sunday. So gives them the maximum amount of rest between games. Playing Friday gives them the maximum amount of rest from playing an early game actually on Saturday. So that'll be fresh by the time they get to tip off on Friday.
We'll bring up the SEC awards here. This is the most Auburn's ever done in terms of, we won't go through all the individual all SEC teams, but this is the most Auburn's done in terms of the individual awards ever, claiming 3 out of the main 5. Obviously, Scholar Athlete of the Year is something that is very highly recognized, but it's not in that main on court recognition. No surprises here, really. I think maybe you got some Auburn fans that are giving some love to Wendell Green, a guy like Wendell Green maybe for a 6th man of the year, but Tari Eason, 17 points a game, 7 rebounds for LSU, definitely emerged as the front runner there. But this is the most success we've ever seen this program have in terms of these individual awards. And then on the all SEC teams, obviously here, because you see them on the list, Jabari Smith and Walker Kessler both made the first team. That's the first time that Auburn has had 2 first-teamers since Doc Robinson and Chris Porter back in 1999. So tons of success for Auburn here in terms of the individual awards, and Bruce Pearl gets his first Coach of the Year at Auburn.
And 1998-99 was the last time they won the SEC championship outright. And that team went to the NCAA tournament as the number 1 seed. And, that team with Doc, Scotty Pullman, Bryant Smith, Mamadou Njai, Chris Porter, Nate Watson, a lot of players. They just beat the tar out of folks. They won by an average of 20 points a game. And this team was winning by 12 points a game, 12.2, which is really good. But it just shows you how good that 1998-99 team was and how disappointed Auburn fans were when Auburn got upset in the Sweet 16 by Ohio State, who had a guard named Scooney Penn, who just had a fabulous game that night in Knoxville. So, I don't see any really, big problems with the All SEC. Just look at the first team. I mean, everybody on there belongs. JD Note of Arkansas has had a fabulous season at guard. Jalen Williams at Arkansas, one of the best big guys in the league. Of course, the 2 Auburn guys. Oscar Tshiebwe, Kentucky. He's had one of the best statistical years as a rebounder in college basketball in many years. And you mentioned Tari Eason, certainly deserving of being on the first team, even though he's coming off the bench mostly. Iverson Molinars had a really good year at Mississippi State. Santiago Vescovi, it's much improved over what he was last year. And Tennessee's got 4 guards playing well. And a couple of those guys got recognized on the other teams too. And Scottie Pippen Jr., who probably be playing pro basketball this time next year, he's the league's leading scorer, and he's the Vandy representative, and he's really deserving of it too.
Yeah, we've seen, before. I was talking to somebody earlier today that, winning should matter more. Talking about maybe a guy like a Wendell Green for sixth man of the year. But I mean, Scottie Pippen was the preseason player of the year in the conference, and Vandy was picked second to last in the league. A couple years ago, Anthony Edwards was the freshman of the year, and Georgia finished second to last in the league. So I really do think they did a decent job here. I think, all the individual performances were pretty well recognized. And then for Bruce Pearl, again, so many references back to that 99 team this year. The SEC wins, they broke that record. Regular season wins broke that record. First outright championship. And Auburn gets its first coach of the year. I think some Auburn fans maybe had to jog their memories a little bit to realize that Bruce Pearl didn't win it when they were picked to go 4-14 in the league. Tennessee was actually picked second to last in the league that year, and then also shared the championship. So that's why it went to Rick Barnes back in 2018. But Bruce Pearl gets his first coach of the year at Auburn, and the first since that 1999 team when Cliff Ellis was SEC coach of the year.
Yeah, the Bruce Pearl in his 8th season at Auburn, he's certainly done a lot of good work, and he could cement himself as like an Auburn legend if they go ahead and win the SEC tournament this year, and then make another great run to the Final Four. And he's certainly got a team capable of doing that, but they got to get better in certain areas if they're going to survive and advance in the NCAA tournament. And I think that's even the case for down in Tampa, Nathan. They're going to have a tough opening round game, whether it's Florida or whether it's Texas A&M. Texas A&M has won 5 of its last 6 games, and it's sort of a strange team. They got off to a great start. They didn't play a lot of tough competition early, but they surprised me. They won, I believe, their first 4 SEC games. Then they just started losing, and lost a lot of close games. Really, about the only close loss in their 8-game losing streak in league play was to Auburn at Auburn Arena, and then they bounced back and won and finished up really strong to close the season. And then Florida's been Auburn's nemesis, and there he is, second team All-SEC, Colin Castleton, guy who's given Auburn problems both times they played. They got to deal with the Gators. They got to deal with Coach Mike White. Gators like to slow the pace down, play good physical defense, and it's going to be interesting to see how many Florida fans show up if Auburn ends up playing those guys on Friday.
Yeah, I think that could be. Kentucky travels really well. Although I have only ever been around the program when the game has been in Nashville. Gotta imagine they'll do the same in Tampa. Tennessee usually travels well. Florida obviously going to be really close for them. I think just because of hearing Auburn fans how long ago they booked up tickets for Tampa. It seems like maybe if they face off against the Gators, that will be one of the better attended sessions of the SEC tournament. That could really feel like an NCAA tournament game. But Mark, you said you've got your bracket with you. We're going to pull one up on the screen here. So it's a fun bracket this year. The interesting thing, Mark, is that I was talking to Jalen Williams about this today after practice, and this team, nobody from this team has ever played in an SEC tournament game, which is bizarre because Preston Cook would be really the only one. But they said that's something they've talked about this week. He didn't play during that Final Four season, that run down in the SEC tournament in Nashville. And so nobody on this team, because last year, obviously you had the postseason ban, and before that, nobody got to play. So this is their first crack at it as a team. Obviously you got a bunch of new guys too that haven't had an opportunity to play in the tournament as well. And it's a bit of a departure, obviously, from the usual when you're talking about it, usually being in Nashville. But Mark, I get the sense maybe you're leaning Florida a little bit, maybe not. Let's just talk about that game a little bit, that Florida-Texas A&M matchup, and who might be Auburn's most difficult opponent out of those two. For me, the guy you mentioned, Colin Castleton, is a big reason why. Number one, because he's matched up really well against Walker Kessler. Number two, Walker Kessler might not be 100%. He's still wearing that brace. He's not 100%. And so that becomes an even more intriguing matchup. I think when you're talking about Auburn, maybe that's the team of those two they would least like to see, even though they're the lower seed here technically than Texas A&M.
Right. Yeah. The Aggies Quentin Jackson is really playing great right now. He's probably one of the hottest players in the league. He's a guard. He's scoring against everybody. Um, he's the SEC Player of the Week to close the season, and I'm not convinced the Gators are going to get past them. Florida's tough to figure out. I've watched them going back, I guess, into November or whenever it was, and they played down at Fort Myers and they beat Ohio State when Ohio State was riding high. And but I've seen Florida play some bad games, and I think Florida had the worst loss in the SEC this season, losing at home to Texas Southern, which I think at the time Texas Southern had won a game. So I mean, it's a mystery to me who's going to come out of that game. And I know Auburn's been preparing for both teams in practice. So, but I think Auburn certainly got the right stuff to advance past the Gators or Texas A&M in that quarterfinal matchup.
Yeah, especially because talking about a guy like Kessler, but just the team overall, it was getting to the point at the end of the regular season where you just been playing so many games, and for Auburn, you were getting everybody's best shot every single game, especially on the road. Those turned into some brutal games. Talking about Arkansas went to overtime, Mississippi State went to overtime. That Florida game was very physical. So Auburn started to get beat up a little bit down the stretch. Walker Kessler really the only injury, actual injury per se that was really going on at the time. But for Auburn, you love to get that double bye. You mentioned it earlier. Bruce Pearl really is glad to have the early games. Makes things easier from a scouting perspective. If you win that game, you have pretty much the whole day to kind of look ahead to your next opponent. I think most are probably looking to staying on Auburn's side of the bracket. Most likely LSU moving up, LSU the 5 seed to play Arkansas. That's a game that we just saw a week and a half ago that LSU almost won in Fayetteville. LSU's a lot like Florida, where obviously they're a lot better. They're going to the tournament for sure. It's a tricky team to figure out. It's a team that really struggled when they didn't have Xavier Pinson at point guard, struggled on the offensive side of the ball. But if that ends up being the matchup for Auburn, that if they're able to get past Florida or Texas A&M, it's going to be a great defensive matchup. But I think the one the Auburn players might want a little bit more, some comments Zep Jasper made this week, is that Arkansas game. Really getting a rematch of that game that they lost in Fayetteville. And that might be the hottest team in the SEC, one of the hottest teams in the country. I know they lost at Tennessee, but I think they won, 12 out of their last 14 games of the regular season.
16, yeah.
14 to 16, yeah. So I think, in terms of a matchup, I think Auburn, they've already got the win over LSU. Maybe they'd feel a little more comfortable with that. But in terms of build-up, there's just been a lot of friction building between Auburn and Arkansas and the fan bases ever since that game. So if that ends up being the game, Auburn versus Arkansas in the semifinals, I think that'd be a really, really good one.
Oh, I agree. I'd pay good money to go watch that game because you're right. I think the Auburn players really want to beat Arkansas after the Razorbacks ended the winning streak out there in overtime. And, Auburn, it was amazing. Auburn played one of its poorer games of the year and still almost found a way to win out there.
Yeah.
And so Jalen Williams is a really great matchup for Walker Kessler. He's 6'11". He's athletic. He's a smart player. He hustles. He can force Kessler out away from the basket because he can hit uncontested three-point shots. And then you got J.D. Notae, who one of the toughest one-on-one covers there is in the SEC. And I'm curious to see if this matchup happens, if Zep Jasper gets a chance to do his thing against J.D. Notae, because Zep was ill when they played out there at Fayetteville. And so he was having to watch that game from home on television. So that should be really interesting. The other side of the bracket's got some good games too. I'm not exactly sure who's going to advance for sure. The one thing I do think we can count on is the bottom half opening game between Georgia and Vanderbilt. Neither of those teams are going to go very far.
Yeah, I think out of those four, you're looking at obviously Georgia, the 14 seed, this stumbling to the finish line. Tom Crean today, the AJC reported that he's out. It's not a blockbuster, of course, but they're gonna, obviously they're gonna finish out the season tomorrow. And then Missouri and Ole Miss, they played shortly before the season ended. On the other side, I think Vanderbilt out of those four is probably the only one that could really give anybody trouble. You look at they would play Alabama, the 6th seed, in the next game. When they play well, they almost beat Florida at home. They choked that game away though at the end of the season. When they play well, obviously they had a good spurt there at Auburn. But when you're looking at that other side now, Mark, obviously Tennessee and Kentucky are the high seeds there. Most people would expect that to be the semifinal matchup, and that would be fantastic. Both of those teams won the respective games on their home floors this season. Let's say Vanderbilt advances, obviously, past Georgia. Out of those 4 in that middle for the other side, Mississippi State, South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Alabama, which of those 4 teams do you think has the best opportunity of giving the top seed some trouble?
If you just look at them physically, Nathan, I'd be Mississippi State. But for some reason, Mississippi State just doesn't get it done. I mean, it's a beautiful looking team, big, athletic, good players at a variety of positions, but they have this one huge Achilles heel that is a big one, and they can't make 3-point shots consistently. And they end up losing a lot of close games because of that. So Alabama, who knows what those guys are going to do? I mean, they're all over the place. Their defense is generally not real great, and so if they run into a team that's shooting well, like Texas A&M was the other day when they played in Tuscaloosa, they're in jeopardy of losing. But Alabama's got perhaps the best non-conference win of any SEC team this year, going out to Seattle. It was allegedly a neutral site game, but it wasn't, because almost all the fans there were Gonzaga fans. And not only do they win, they just wiped them out there. And that's still the number 1 team in the country right now. So, I would think Alabama's most likely to advance. And I think, South Carolina has got a possibility of getting to the quarterfinals. They played much better later in the season. When Auburn first played South Carolina, they had all kinds of problems. They had illnesses, they had injuries. I remember Frank Martin saying they weren't able to even have normal practices there for a couple of weeks, and they had some games they were scheduled to play get canceled. So I think he's done a really good job of regrouping that bunch.
We were talking about this today, or somebody brought it up on the Zoom call with Bruce Pearl. You and I are by no means bracketologists, of course, and we just look at what everybody else says. But the assumption was made in a question to Walker Kessler that you guys have locked up a 1 seed. What motivation is there now? You look around the brackets, that's obviously not true. Kentucky could jump them, Kansas could jump them. I think Auburn's the 4th in most brackets. Auburn's the 4th number 1 seed right now. But I think this team probably, you had talked to a couple of players about it today, their motivation going down to Tampa after winning the regular season. They've probably got plenty of it because, number one, you want to get that number 1 seed. Like Bruce Pearl's been saying all season, they want to be continually rewarded for everything that they've done this year. They want the payoff. The number 1 seed obviously helps you out. But also, as Jabari Smith said, this team's already won a championship. That doesn't mean they're going to get complacent. In his words, he said, that means we know what it feels like. It feels great. It feels good to win a championship. We want to go down there and win another one. So I don't think this team will be lacking in motivation just because they're the 1 seed, just because seemingly, they've already accomplished a lot. They're going to be they're still jockeying for positioning in the NCAA tournament, even with, only 5 days till Selection Sunday.
Yeah, the sports writer who asked that question is a really good one, but he was out in left field with that comment that Auburn's got a number 1 seed locked up, because that is not even close to being accurate. Auburn's got work to do in Tampa if it's going to get out of there with a 1 seed. I don't necessarily think they have to win the SEC tournament, but I would think they probably need to get to the finals to do it, and they would probably have to play well in the finals, because there's a bunch of teams out there that are candidates for 1 seeds right now, Nathan.
Yeah, I think a one win in Tampa probably gives you a pretty good shot of being a 1 seed. And like you said, 2 wins. You get to Sunday, you might play. You're going to play somebody like Tennessee or Kentucky. Probably they're on a roll right now. Who knows whether they'd actually win that game? But I would think two games would give you a pretty good opportunity there. Right now, you look at bracket matrix, which is a combination of 100+ brackets kind of into a composite. Yeah, Auburn's the 4th number 1 seed. By the way, Alabama continually perplexing. Baylor and Gonzaga will probably be the number 1 and number 2 overall seed, and Alabama beat both of those teams this season. But then they go and lose to somebody like Georgia. But then, so in the rest of the matrix, Kansas is the first 2 seed, followed by Kentucky, followed by Duke after that. You think Duke is probably, unless they go on some kind of run and look really good, it's probably between those. Kansas and Kentucky are going to, be sort of lying in the wings, waiting to jump up and try to, take over that fourth number 1 spot. So it's probably between those 3 teams now: Auburn, Kansas, and Kentucky. You'd think Baylor, Gonzaga, and Arizona. And if you look at the points, I know I keep referencing visual mediums, and some of y'all listen to this on a podcast. That's not a great idea, but those 3 have probably locked it up. So Auburn, Kansas, and Kentucky, a lot of that is going to depend on the next week. Mark, like you said, you're probably heading down maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day. I'll be down soon, heading to Tampa. Really looking forward to getting back and getting in the tournament setting. It's been a little bit for us covering this team in a setting like that, of course, because of the postseason stuff that we mentioned. What are you looking for in terms of looking ahead to Selection Sunday? Obviously, the stakes are real right now, but after this, they get really, really real. I guess, what are you looking for in this team in terms of how they play? Maybe some individual, guys that need to step it up. What are you going to be watching in this team in Tampa that'll make you a little bit more comfortable with where they are going into the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, Nathan, there's probably several things to watch for in Tampa to get a good gauge on how Auburn might do in the NCAA tournament. When the Tigers have played their best basketball, they've made the extra pass. They haven't necessarily taken the first shot available. They've taken the second, third, or fourth shot and worked for a good one and try to play in rhythm. And, the more they share the ball, the better they play. And, you can go overboard with it too. You don't want to be rushing one up at the shot clock when you've waited too long to take one. And they got in a little stretch there midway in the season when they were taking too many shots at the end of the shot clock. But in general, when they played their best basketball, they've scored in transition for their early baskets, either off a steal or off a rebound and getting it and going, or they've taken a little bit of time and set up a couple good picks, run their offense. They got a variety of different plays and gotten somebody a good look at the basket. And they, when they're really playing well, they get these open 3-point shots not too far behind the line, or they get like pick and rolls and get the ball to Kessler or somebody else inside for a really high percentage shot. The big thing to watch is rebounding. They just got killed on the boards over at Mississippi State in the last road game on the boards. They managed to win that game in overtime. They just, haven't rebounded well at all the last 3 games at Tennessee. That was a huge problem and probably was the reason why they lost up at Knoxville. And they did a lot of things less than stellar as far as their overall performance, but the rebounding was just too much to overcome. And even at home in the regular season finale against South Carolina team that they out-rebounded up in Columbia over the season, they were -1 in rebounding margin. And for a long time, Auburn was one of the leaders in the league in rebounding margin and was even ahead of Kentucky in rebound margin for conference play. And Kentucky's certainly been great in rebound margin. So those are the things to look for, in my opinion, Nathan.
Yeah, I think you can see the past couple games, maybe 2, 3, 4 games, maybe a concerted effort to get back to that high pick and roll with Wendell Green and Walker Kessler. I thought that was such a big part of their offense, especially during that winning streak in the early stages of SEC play. Bruce Pearl has said it all season, or toward the end of the season, really, that people start keying in on the half-court offense. It gets harder for everybody because, the scouts are out. People figure out how to defend it a little better, but maybe there's a glimmer of that right now. I think they had a little more success with it. Tennessee, they had a little bit. Mississippi State and South Carolina, they were running it a little bit better. I mean, that Alabama game where they scored 100, they were doing that like every other possession. So that's not the bread and butter of the offense, but it's certainly something that worked really well, very rhythmic for those two. Walker Kessler, obviously, that's when he's at his best. We'll see how healthy he is. Obviously, that's going to be something we'll be watching as well. And then for me, I'm interested still to see how much farther can Jabari Smith go. It seems like he's already turned the corner from being a great player to a superstar. 25 points per game over his last 6 games in the regular season. If he wasn't an All-American before the last 3 weeks of the season, he completely locked that up. Obviously, freshman of the year in the SEC was no contest with him. And, those number one overall pick conversations, they hadn't faded away, but, they weren't as hot, there for a little bit. He's brought those back with a vengeance. And so Auburn thought 2 years ago it was going to get to see its eventual top 5 pick in Isaac Okoro, what he could do in the postseason. The stars come out in March. Players like that always seem to have big impacts for their team. We saw it with Chumo Kiki on the Final Four team. So now Auburn will finally get to see, its best player on the biggest stage. So I'll be interested to see how he performs in the postseason as well. So, Mark, thanks so much for hopping on today. That was a fun conversation. Thank you so much to everybody on Facebook who tuned in to this live stream talking about Auburn basketball. Obviously, it's about to be a really good week, a really fun week for them down in Tampa. Their first game is on Friday. Like we were talking about, they'll play the winner of Texas A&M Florida. That game will be on ESPN at 11 a.m. On Friday, 11 a.m. Central Time. So if you're at work, find an excuse, go ahead and get on your company Wi-Fi now. That way you have the ability to do that. And like we were talking about, it's such an advantage. The early game, Texas A&M and Florida, they are the first game of the day, Thursday. So Auburn will have the entire day of practice. On Thursday, they'll be doing an on-site practice there in Tampa. They'll have that entire day to scout and prepare for that team, Texas A&M and Florida, whoever wins that game. So should be a really fun week. Mark and I will be coming at you guys with all kinds of stuff. Hopefully we can do some more podcasts and some more live streams from down there in Tampa. Really, really excited to get down there and cover this team. And we'll see if they can make another deep run as they did a couple years ago. So thank you so much for listening. The intro and outro music is by Beats by Mordecai. You guys can find him Twitter, SoundCloud, and Instagram. Until the next time, we will catch you guys later. Everybody enjoy the basketball this week.